Hi everyone, Nigel Saunders here. Today I'll be working on my Ficus microcarpa that I grew from a seed. I repotted this tree just last winter and I piled the soil up kind of high around the roots just to make sure they got established. So today I'll start by raking away that surface soil and getting it down to the correct level for the pot. So here I go. I'll just start near the center of the tree and rake outwards. I had this tree in the greenhouse since spring, and I was trying to get more aerial roots generating from the trunk, but I think it just didn't get enough vigor. I think because I just repotted it maybe, and it was very hot in the greenhouse, maybe the tree kind of got a little too much heat stress. So it didn't get much in the way of aerial roots. I did get a lot of new roots growing along the surface of the soil, so you can see those there. So they're kind of going everywhere, so I'll have to kind of rake them out to try and get them, more of a radial pattern, so they're not just random. And I can always add more soil. If I take away too much soil and I think, too much of the root base is exposed, I can always, add more soil to it. Some fresh soil on top, or, maybe just the layer of moss will bring it back up to the correct level. You can see some of these aerial roots are developing their own radial root system, which is kind of nice. The soil on the surface here is kind of black in color, and that's because it has a layer of algae built up on top. Algae or moss or something. And usually when it goes black like that, it just means that moss will appear shortly after. I can remember when this root was just a skinny, tiny aerial root going across the surface of the soil. And now it's almost getting too thick. I'm around the back now, working away, getting the soil level lowered. It's quite high at the back here. Just getting all the soil out between the roots here. Giving them a bit of open space. I'll just do a little more work around the front. I think it's still a little high and tangled up front here. But it's getting close. Especially in here, I think. Got a lot of soil that's kind of piled high up in here. I'm going a little lower than I would normally because I will be adding moss to this. So that's why when I fill my soil up in the pots, I leave it, about this much below the lip of the pot, and that allows for a layer of moss. With the surface roots raked out, I can trim them back from the edges of the pot so they're not overhanging, like that. This front root could be corrected by twisting it in tighter like that. Some people put like screws through the roots and stuff to hold them in place. I don't like doing that. And if you put something around here to bring it in tight, it leaves a permanent mark across the root. So I think I'll just have to leave it be. This one I can probably reposition. It's kind of locked into the soil here, but if I can pull it out, maybe. Wow, it's really locked into the soil here. There, got part of it out. And then I can maybe tuck it under another root. Wow, there's a lot of roots attached to this one. So yeah, if I could bring that one down underneath here, I think it'll look a lot better. Like that. That's much better. Picks up that soil a bit. So these roots are just kind of growing on top of the soil for now, and I'll have to kind of try and bury them in the soil a bit, especially at the ends here. The root at the back here isn't very straight, but it kind of matches the angle of this one, so it's not too bad. That is also something I could possibly correct in the future, is to bring this back root straight down. I don't know if that would improve the styling of the tree or not, but it's something I'll keep in mind for the future. The trunk on the tree has a lot of algae buildup, so I'll have to get the toothbrush and water and give that a scrub and get it, a nice light color. So I'll do that next. I've got my toothbrush and some rainwater, so here I go. So this is the back of the tree I'm doing first. Just brushing off all that green algae and getting it back down to the color of the bark. You tend to get a lot of algae around the root base here too because it's always moist. You get moss on the roots. So it's nice to get that all cleaned up. You can see the green algae being scrubbed off and exposing the bark color below. This kind of reminds me of cleaning up my old pickup truck. It took a lot of brushing and scrubbing and rinsing with water to get all the lichen and algae off that too. The bark on a really old ficus will turn almost white with age. So this one has a while to go still. It all depends on how much sun it gets and kind of turns that outer layer of bark almost a white or light gray color. So that's something to look forward to in the future. I'm just getting all that algae off the roots now. If you don't get the algae off the roots and you don't have the roots the same color as the trunk, it looks like it was just freshly dug up and placed on top of the soil. So you want your roots to have the same texture and bark color as the trunk of the tree. And that makes it look like, it's more ancient because all these exposed roots have gotten the sun and they've kind of turned the same color. And you can only do that with age. I mean, the more these roots are exposed to sunlight, the more they get the same bark color and texture as the trunk. There's not any way you can really artificially create that. I've got the trunk washed up now and the root base. So next I'm going to pick up some moss from the front sidewalk to place around the base of the tree. I'm out front of the house ready to collect moss from the front sidewalk. Here's a nice layer of moss here. So I'll scrape that off and that can be used on top of the soil. This moss is growing in full sun, so it should do really well on my ficus tree. I've got the tree in the shade, so now I can start to apply the moss. So I think the first step, I'll soak the moss in a tray of water just to get it nice and moist to make it easy to apply to the surface of the soil. I'll just place the strips in the water just so they get a nice soaking. Makes them more pliable, makes it easier to apply to the surface of the soil. I tried to pick moss that didn't have any weeds growing in it. But if you do find weeds start growing in your moss, just, get the tweezers and pick the weeds out and it'll keep your moss nice and, weed free. On the back layer of the moss, there's a thin layer of soil, and if you rub that off as much as you can, it makes the layer of moss thinner and easier to apply. So I just do that in the water, I give it a soaking, rub the back of the moss, try and remove as much soil as possible. You want to keep a fine layer of soil, but not so it's really thick and heavy. Just kind of a light layer. When the moss is really thin and flexible, then you can start applying it to the tree. Just like that. So I'm going to apply moss around the perimeter, and then towards the inside of the tree here, I'll be using sand. So it'll be sand around the base of the tree and then transitioning to moss. And that's usually how you see trees in nature. Underneath the base of the tree, there's very little plant life growing because it's in shadow. And as you get further out from the base of the tree, you get more and more plant life, grasses and mosses and stuff. So that's the look I'm going for. I just pieced the moss together like a jigsaw puzzle, filling in all the gaps and pressing it down, making sure it gets good contact with the soil. And that little thin layer of soil behind kind of helps bind it to the bonsai soil. All the cracks in the sidewalk, they fill with a fine layer of soil that kind of blows around like dust and that. And it settles into the cracks in the sidewalk. So when it does get wet, it holds a lot of moisture, and that's why the moss grows there. So by keeping a layer of that base soil with your moss, your success rate of your moss taking really goes up. Because it's like the ideal soil for moss to grow on is that fine, free draining soil that blows in all the cracks. It's almost like dust. When you're selecting the moss, it's best to get moss that isn't too thick too. You want it so it's just starting to form, so there's a very thin layer of moss. Once it gets big, thick and fluffy, it's not really of much use in bonsai work. I find in a planting like this, it looks best with a uniform layer of moss, so all the moss is an even texture and green color. But in a forest, it looks better with different kinds of moss in clumps. So it looks more like bushes and a change of terrain. But in a single tree like this, I like to see a uniform layer of moss. I don't like to see clumps of different color, and I think that just distracts you away from the root base in the tree. But in a forest, it definitely looks better with a variety of different kinds of texture and color on the forest floor. I've got the front pretty well roughed in. I'm just, trying to make a transition. So, a few more clumps here and there just to break up so there's not an edge where the moss ends and the sand starts. So I'm just adding a few clumps here and there. And I think maybe a clump over here, like that. And I think the rest can be filled in with sand in this area. So I'll work around the back now with the moss. I also try and do this moss work a few weeks in advance. So by the time the show comes along, it's all kind of spread a bit and grown upright so it doesn't look like it was just pushed down with your fingers. And it looks very natural for the show. It doesn't look like you just mossed the tree the night before. To me, moss should look like it was established and has been there for the life of the tree. It should give that illusion. Not that it was just freshly placed on. You can hear the cicadas singing in the trees. And definitely know it's late summer when you hear that noise. Here's a look at the moss now. I've applied it. I've brought it to the edge of the pot and then a little bit in towards the roots, and I've got space for my sand in there. So that's the front, and I'll come around the side here like that, and we'll come around the back. Well, there's the back and over the other side. So that's mossed up, and I think it's looking good. It's a nice moss. It's a nice height. So next I'll apply the sand. For the sand layer, I don't want the white colored sand. It would be too bright and unnatural. So I'm going to go with the dark brown playground sand, and that should blend in and look very realistic with the tree. Okay, here I go with the sand layer now. So I'll just start at the base of the tree using my Munchkin soil scoop, which is really cool. Yeah, I'll just pour it around the base, and then when I water the tree, it'll flow kind of naturally into the moss and kind of blend. And the moss will creep up the sand layer, so by show time it should look pretty natural, I hope. I'll go around the back and do the same. Just blending it all in. Okay, I think it's time to give the tree a water and get all that sand worked in. Okay, here I go with the water now. So I'll start and it'll kind of flow around the roots, into the moss cracks, and make a natural kind of transition. At least I hope. We'll go around the back here now. Do the same thing. Work that in. And a bit around here. Getting all the angles. And that looks pretty good. The sand layer is down now, so I'll pick out all the chunks of perlite and bonsai soil that's sticking up over the surface and just cleaning it up. There's not a whole lot, but some. And you can see some parts of the moss are covered with sand, but that'll recover very quickly. The moss will grow in with the sand, and that sand will just disappear under the layer of moss eventually. And if you get your timing right, it looks really, really natural. So I'm hoping, you know, by showtime, the moss is looking really good. The next step for this tree is to start to prune the top of the tree. It's kind of looking wild, like my hair. So I'm looking at the tree, and with my hand, I will try and picture how I want to shape the canopy. You know, do I want it really rounded, quite a flat umbrella, more triangular? So I've got to look at all the options and decide how I want the profile of the canopy to be. I'm kind of leaning towards a flatter canopy somewhere about there. I think it's about where I pruned it last time. So yeah, I think I don't really like the triangular style. It doesn't really suit a ficus, I don't think. I mean, you can have kind of a higher rounded triangular style, but that looks a lot better, but it still doesn't, I don't know, when I think of a tropical tree, I think of this big, huge umbrella spreading canopy. I don't think of a triangular type top to the tree, so I'm going to style mine with that big kind of umbrella shape up top. So, all right, so here I go. I'll start by picking a height for my canopy, and I think somewhere about here. That kind of keeps the ramification I already have in the canopy, and the rest is just kind of shooting straight up. So I'll prune all those vertical shoots and those straight shoots down lower, keeping my ramification, but reducing the height. So I'll just clip away. And again, I'm always doing directional pruning, trying to prune to leaves that are facing outwards in the canopy. I have quite a strong shoot at the back here that I'll need to reduce back quite a bit. Yeah. I'll just do it in stages. You can always prune lower, but you can't make it higher. So I'll start by pruning, you know, a little higher than I think, and then gradually reduce it down. So the canopy has to be rounded front to back, side to side, and when you view it from above, it should look like a big oval. So longer left to right and shorter front to back. I'm just doing a little refinement now, pruning off some of the growing tips to get some, you know, some branching. Just nipping the ends off, cleaning up anything that's kind of sticking up out of the profile, like right here. There's a tip here that I could prune back. So hopefully this tree will put on some growth before the show. Got a couple of weeks, I think, still. So I'm also looking for density of foliage. If it's too dense in one area, I can thin out some of the leaves and kind of create a balanced canopy. That's what I'm always striving towards, is getting, you know, a nice balance and thickness of branches, density of foliage, the shape, just getting it nicely proportioned. So you just gotta, you know, study your tree and look for ways you can improve it. There's a shot of the tree now, all pruned up and as close as I can get it at this point in time for the show. I may have to come in and, you know, refine it a bit before the show, cleaning the landscape up a bit. I'm sure there'll be some new shoots coming out in the canopy that I may have to trim back, and I may have to take some more of the older leaves out just to, you know, get it looking better. But I think overall it looks quite nice. It looks like a tropical tree to me, a giant tropical tree that would grow in a rainforest. So yeah, I'm happy with the progress. It's got some faults. I mean, I've kind of got a double branch growing out of the one side there. There's one going towards the back and one towards the right hand side. But you know, the branch, it's a natural looking branch, and you would see something like that in nature. So I don't view that as a defect at all. I view that as more of a feature that, you know, that's the way the tree grew. I accept that. That's the way the tree is. Just like when I walk by trees in the street or in the nature, there's some funny branches coming out of them that, you know, if I had my choice, I wouldn't grow a branch in that position, but it grew there, and that's natural, and you kind of, that's the way the tree is. And yeah, I think if you try and make them look too perfect, they look artificial. So yeah, I don't view those two branches as a defect. I view them as more of a bit of character to the tree. It gives it a unique look. We'll fly in now and have a look at the tree. So it's looking pretty good. This tree will just get better in the future. It's, you know, I'd call it still in the developmental stage, but there's the root base. So you can see there's a lot of sand covering the moss, but that'll change. It'll certainly, that moss will come through the sand and it'll look more mossy than it does now. And right now it looks more sandy than mossy, but so the trunk's cleaned up quite nicely. It's a better color. And the canopy's looking pretty good. There's some old leaves in there that don't look so hot, but you know, I'm too late to leaf prune it for sure for this year, so I'll just have to accept it for the way it is for now. And that's it. That's the tree. It's time now for today's update. Today's update is my pink pixie bougainvillea right here. So it's come out into leaf really nicely, and they're growing really well. There's a shot of it. Yeah, it looks quite nice, I think. That branch on the right-hand side that's kind of shooting up, I'm hoping to get some more horizontal branches coming off of that in future. I think that'll happen. I do have another pot that I may eventually put it into as it grows bigger and larger. So, but I think for now that pot's still good. I haven't seen any flowers appearing on it, so it may not have any flowers for the show, but I'll just keep my fingers crossed, and who knows, maybe I'll get lucky and get a few flowers at least. That's all for today. I'm Nigel Saunders. Thanks for joining me today in the Bonsai Zone.